Hello and welcome to the Mosaic Mondays, first podcast. I'm your host, Calum Roberts, and I'm excited to have Greg Tanaka here as my first guest. Greg is the CEO and co founder of Percolator, a company that uses ML technology to help boost retail sales by 30%, and also a US congressional candidate of California. I couldn't think of anyone more fitting than yourself for the first podcast, Greg, so thanks for coming.
Well, Caleb, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
No worries. So how have you been before we jump into it? I hear you went to Korea. How was it?
So I was just there like a week and a half ago. So it was cold and snowy, and yeah, but it was good overall. Yeah, I was there for a conference, so spoke about a. You may not have heard of it, but it's a kind of a new L1. It's not really new, but it's a different L1 called Amax G. It's based off of EOS. So I didn't know a lot about that space, so it was actually quite interesting. And I didn't know a lot about the Korean crypto scene. So learned a bit about that too.
Yeah. So what were the benefits of that blockchain?
Yeah, so EOS is actually kind of like pre-Solana. So Solana, today, although Solana's having a lot of trouble, but today is kind of like known as the speedy network, right? They really emphasize using a lot of compute power to make the transaction cost low and fast. But before Solana, there was EOS, and EOS, at one point was a high flyer, and it fell big time, and kind of Solana took its place, and so and there were hacks and other issues, and so yeah, and then so this other protocol that kind of, or this other L1 that kind of spun off of EOS, that's trying to fix some of the problems and provide kind of like the full vision of what EOS wanted to be.
Yeah. Awesome. So how did you get involved with that as well? Did I reach out to you or?
You know, so I've been in the industry for a while, so I get to know a lot of people, and so the folks behind it wanted to, there's a lot of crypto stuff out there, but a lot of it is crypto for crypto's sake. You know what I'm saying? So like, the product is a token, and the product is a token going up in value, and and there's not a lot of real practical uses. But the vision behind this other one is really focused on making it for everyday use. So less about like the product is not necessarily the token. The product is really helping to ease transactions, and in particular, the focus is around e-commerce. So trying to make it easier and cheaper and faster to do e-commerce. So that's the focus. So it's less about trying to make yet another L1 or another pump and dump type scheme, and a little bit more about like how to actually use like Web3 technology to for a practical application. In this case, it's e-commerce, to make that more efficient.
And I know you got a lot of history with e-commerce yourself, with your company. I guess a bit of a background on that would be helpful as well.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, so I started Percolata. We actually started out as a computer vision company. So at that time, this was the early, like 2012, basically time frame. Before then, a lot of computer vision was done using what's called engineered features. So something called like SIF, SIRF. So there's a lot of these engineered features, and the problem with these engineered features is that they're very brittle. So if the wind blew the wrong way, basically the computer vision wouldn't work, right? And kind of at this time frame, something called AlexNet came out, which is basically this idea of using a deep neural network. Now today that's standard, right? But back then, the process was use these engineered features, and there were a ton of them, right? There was a whole slew of them, but they all had the weakness of being very brittle. And what happened with AlexNet was it just blew everyone's socks off, right? It basically it wasn't just like a little bit better. Like every year, and like there's a computer conference called CVPR, Computer Vision Conference, and every year people would like eke out just a little bit more. AlexNet was like this quantum jump, like boom, right? And it's kind of like it's what set us off on this, AI machine learning thing right now. Like with ChatGPT, it's kind of all started with this. Before then, things were kind of in the doldrums, kind of like not really working, and so suddenly computer vision actually worked, and so we use computer vision to basically give like Google Analytics for the physical world, right? So have cameras in stores, kind of understand the flow, the top of funnel, and how people went through the store and shopped. And what we would do is we would provide staffing optimizations, and so that was kind of the you know how we got there was through computer vision, and then doing a lot of forecasting. So we had to forecast for the store how much traffic would come in, and then how much staffing they would need to actually fulfill that traffic. So yeah, and it was kind of a very novel thing at the time, and we got a lot of interest, and had a lot of customers and success. So yeah, it was quite interesting.
What was the reason why computer vision all of a sudden had that big spike in progress?
It was because we used neural networks. So before, neural networks are really old. They've been around like, I don't know, since the 60s and 70s. So they've been around forever. But the big problem was they were never large enough, and there was never enough of a data set to actually work. And so basically, that's why people went to the engineered features, because neural networks really didn't work. And there was also this debate, like, okay, well, how will AI work? Will it be through neural networks? Will it be through expert systems? Will it be through, they had all these different possibilities of how AI would work. And today, of course, it's standardized on neural networks. But until you reach a certain size and have a certain size data set, it simply didn't work. And AlexNet basically benefited from the fact that there was this benchmark that you could use, right? You could train on and use. And because of this benchmark, it actually came from my alma mater, Caltech. Because of this Caltech data set, you could train a neural network on it. And if you use a neural network on it, it would do a lot better. And that's, I think that's something that people didn't realize back, in a 2010, 2011 timeframe, was that if you had enough data, you could train very, very powerful models and do amazing things. Today, of course, everyone knows that. But back then, it wasn't obvious, right? People thought the direction was going using these engineered features. But these engineered features, while they work well when you only have a small data set, when you have a large data set, the neural networks just kick ass. And then what also happened was, GPUs became very prevalent. So you could suddenly now, have these massive neural networks. And when we have these massive neural networks, they could do amazing things, right? They could do computer vision very, very reliably. And so, yeah, and so from there, like, everything else kind of happened, right? You saw these large language models starting to pop up. Actually, the big thing that really was transformational was this thing called transformers, right? So that was kind of like the next generation, that next kind of quantum leap, so to speak, in machine learning.
So what exactly are transformers?
Yeah, so in NLP, natural language processing, they used to use something called recurrent neural nets. And what recurrent neural nets are, it's kind of like a neural network, except there's a feedback loop. So it gives it memory, so it can remember what happened. So most neural networks are feed forward only. So it goes only one direction, and they're stateless. There's no state. It never remembers what happened before. But with recurrent neural nets, it will remember what happened before. So it has memory, right? But the problem with these recurrent neural nets is that if you look at the basic architecture of a GPU, it's basically like a gigantic pipeline, like 100, 200 plus stage pipeline. And it doesn't like these feedback loops because it stalls out the pipeline. So you couldn't accelerate these recurrent neural nets on GPUs. And so recurrent neural nets by their nature had to be really small. And what transformers did was something that's rather revolutionary, in that instead of having to have this feedback loop which stalls out the GPUs, you could keep everything as a feed-forward network and use something called a transformer, which is basically use an encoder plus a decoder, and use something that as humans we do all the time, which is attention, right? Right now I'm focusing on you, right? I'm not focused on, I have like 12 monitors here. I'm not focused on my 12 on the monitors. I'm focused on just this one right here. And there's this famous paper that came out from Google called "Attention's All You Need," which is how transformers got started. And just like I don't need to look at all 12 monitors at once in order to have this conversation. Same thing with transformers. You don't have to memorize everything. You just have to pay attention to things that matter, right? And which is why the paper is called "Attention's All You Need." And by keeping everything as a feed forward neural network, basically it's acceleratable, right? You could accelerate it on GPUs. And so now you have, like, you look at some of these largest, large language models like GPT-3 or ChatGPT or something like that. And, there are like 100 billion parameters, right? I mean, like if you chart out the number of parameters, okay, so parameters for modeling is like horsepower or number of cores, right? Like horsepower is for cars or number of cores is for your computer, right? Like, oh, I have a 20 core computer or 32 core computer or whatever. Or like I have a 100 horsepower car or 500 horsepower car, right? Well, for models, number of parameters is kind of the same kind of thing, right? And suddenly these models are now in the billions and billions of parameters, right? And now you could argue like something like ChatGPT could probably pass the Turing test, right? I mean, first of all, probably a lot of humans couldn't pass the Turing test, but the Turing test is a thing that Alan Turing way back when said that this is when when computers reach parity to humans, right? But I think the Turing test is too simple of a test. But basically today, I think like many people could argue ChatGPT would pass the Turing test. And I would also argue a lot of humans probably would not pass the Turing test, right?
So do you use ChatGPT on like a daily basis? I know myself personally, I've been using it like every single day.
So I have 12
it's been like eliminating half an hour of my work.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I have like 12 monitors, and ChatGPT is one of the windows I have open all the time. It used to be like Google, right? But I personally think that Google is in trouble, right? I think that that rather than getting a bunch of blue links, just getting the answer is actually much better. And I think that I think Google is like, I heard they did a code red, right? And they better, because it is probably the biggest existential threat to Google since its history.
Yeah, well, I heard Microsoft was trying to buy like 49%. I'm not sure if they have, or it was just a theory or rumor. But yeah, Bing, like nobody would have thought Bing would pretty much have a comeback, because if they do own it, then you would think they would implement it into Bing. But yeah, do you ever worry that there could be consequences of this? So for instance, with Google, for instance, for every user, when they search, it's sort of governed for that user, instead of being like the truth of what is out there. And now these answers are very specific. So I'm not saying ChatGPT in particular, but even like another company that does it. Is there a concern that this could be, like a form of censorship that we got to keep an eye out for?
Yeah, so my startup got funded by Jason Hortz. So one of the podcasts I listen to a lot is the Jason Hortz podcast, and they recently had a segment on, and they were talking about this very topic, and it kind of happened throughout history, right? So like, when the telephone came out, like people thought that was going to cause a bunch of issues, or when the phonograph came out, right? It was going to put a bunch of musicians out of business, or when the printing press came out, right? It basically put the church out of business, right? So there's all these kind of technologies that come around, and at all times people think that it's going to be the end of the world type of thing, but every time it's only made the world better. And I kind of look at ChatGPT like in some way it's just like a better calculator, right? I mean, before we would spend hours writing stuff and doing a very kind of like rote white collar type of work, and like you said, it saves you a half hour worth of time a day, right? And I think in the end we'll find this technology is going to make us more productive. It's going to make us happier. It's going to allow us to have more with doing less. So I think it's in general a good thing. But I think there's also a lot of fear and uncertainty, and people just don't they think that it's going to be the end of the world, or some sort of like big issue. But I personally think that there's been movies about this, like Terminator, right? It's about how the AI took over the world and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's happened almost with every new technology. It's been like that, right? It's been this like, this dystopian future about how it's going to like destroy all of us and put us all out of work. And I don't think so. I think it's going to just stop. I think it's going to create more jobs. I mean, about a month or so ago, I heard that we hit 8 billion people on Earth. 8 billion people, right? So, I mean, that's a lot of people, right? And so, how do you feed, clothe? How do you give everyone an iPhone? How do you, how do you give everyone the same standard of living that people want, right? It's hard, right? And so, but if you look at how much waste there is in the world, right? How much food is thrown away, right? How much energy is wasted? How much, you know, how many issues are there in the world? You know, with better information, better allocation, a lot of these issues that people face go away, right? And so I think we should use technology, but I think so often, and especially our governments, right? They tend to get it wrong, right? I think in general we should embrace technology because, you know, for most part, a lot of people they don't think about the exponential nature of technology, and when you think about things as a zero sum game, and unfortunately, this is how a lot of politicians think. They think about it as like a zero sum game where, my main job is to take money from this person and give it to this person. It's a tough life, right? I mean, it's hard to win. You're going to just make someone unhappy. But what if 1 + 1 is 5, right? What if instead of having to just be the master reallocator, what if you could grow the pie, right? What if you can actually make it better for everyone, right? Then you're not there's not the have and have nots. It's not this kind of zero sum game. Everyone could have more, right? And I think that's what we should go for. And the only way that's possible is actually through better technology. Um, by using technology. But we have people here in our states. I mean, heck, the congressperson from my district, right? She wants to ban recommendation engines. I mean, you may not. Recommendation engines basically like if you're on Amazon, it says, "Oh, I recommend you to buy this," or you watch TikTok, it says, "Oh, I
Yeah.
recommend this next TikTok video." But it's such a fundamental technology to the internet that but she wants to ban it. She thinks it's a malicious algorithm, and it's very very misguided, unfortunately.
I'm curious because you were saying you think there's going to be more job opportunities out
Yeah.
there. Um, yeah, could you explain that? Because in my head, I think it's going to get so efficient,
Uh-huh.
and then we're just going to automate everything that we
Well,
are going to lose a lot of jobs, and we have to transition into like different roles, obviously, like more
yeah.
content creation and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, so anyone that's used ChatGPT, especially if you try using it for coding, right? Um, Unless you're doing something really simple, the code that ChatGPT spits out doesn't work. Okay, it looks impressive, right? It looks like it should, but if you actually try running it, it usually has problems. And of course, you could use ChatGPT to debug it, but it'll take you a long time. In fact, I would argue it might take you longer to do it that way than just to write it. Okay, but I think what ChatGPT or this kind of technology would do is that we become more editors versus writers, and or more curators versus creators, and so I think there'll be new types of jobs. Of course, some of the old jobs would disappear, right? So, like for instance, I was listening to the podcast, right, where it talked about how before the phonograph came out for movies, people used to have bands that would play music during the show, during the film, right? And then suddenly all those people are now unemployed, and people thought that being a musician would be just it would wipe out all musicians. And there's this famous musician here in the United States, the guy who created all the popular marching songs in our country. He was talking about how this would destroy humanity. He was saying like, oh yeah, so if you have a phonograph, mothers would stop singing to the babies, and if they stop singing to the babies, nobody would create music. And he's talking about all this kind of dreadful stuff that happened. And the truth is, none of that happened. In fact, if anything, musicians make even more than they ever made before, right? Because they could get better distribution. This distribution was no longer the city they lived in, but it was the world, right? So, so I think that's what's going to happen is that there's going to be new types of jobs that we never even thought of, that would allow more of the 8 billion people to have a higher quality of life. And in fact, I don't think we realize it right now, but we we are lucky right now to live where we live because we're kind of on this exponential curve, right? Where the human race population is going exponential right now, which is a little bit dangerous if you think about it, right? But if you think about it, we've never had it as good as we have it now, right? There's never been a time when there's been less poverty, less starvation, more people, more educated people on this earth at a higher standard of living than ever before, and that's only been through technology. And of course, people complain about inequality and complain about all this other stuff. But the truth is that, you know, I much rather live here, like live now, than 50 years ago or 100 years ago, right? Or God forbid, 200 years
Hmm.
ago, because, I'm more likely to be alive now, right? People used to die when they're 40, right? So, I mean, it was a pretty grim situation. Like a lot of babies would die when they were born, right? And a lot of kids would never live past 5. I mean, just die or stuff. I mean, this we're talking about like the United States, right? And now we have this life of luxury. Like even the average poor person in the United States would be better off than the aristocracy of medieval times, right? I mean, so we don't realize that. We don't realize how good we got it, and 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 that's all through technology, right? So better medicines, better computers, better cars, better everything, right? And
Do
so
you think Yeah, do you think people are gonna get lazier, dumber, because it's gonna be so easy to get the answers? Like for calculators, for instance,
yeah,
people today they can't really do any multiplication
yeah,
as they would say 20 years ago
yeah.
because of the technology. Do you think people are gonna do the same with like their writing skills and stuff like that?
Well, I heard the New York schools are trying to ban ChatGPT because people are using it to write essays, right? And I
Yeah.
actually think that's totally the wrong thing. I mean, it's like not using a calculator. I mean, I can't remember the last time I did long division. Like, why would you ever do that? Why would you not just use a calculator, right? Because the time you could have spent doing long division, you could have started the next great crypto company, right? Or you could do something else, right? So I think it gets rid of the drudgery, right? The stuff that, I mean, you become now an editor. So rather than writing that essay, you become an editor and, a prompt engineer. You start becoming, you start working more at a higher level. The low, routine stuff like, okay, did I get my grammar right? Did I spell, the word correctly, right? All this kind of other bullshit that you usually have to deal with is now gone, right? And so I think the school district should be doing just the opposite. They should be having kids use it as much as they possibly can to create the best possible essays, right? I think that's far far better. But that's the future. The past is doing long division. Like I don't know anyone who benefits by doing long division, right? It's like, yeah, sure, you could do it, but why? Like, what's to what purpose? Because the human mind is only so big, right? It's only so finite, and we only have so much time. Do we want to spend our time doing long division, or do we want to spend our time, being entrepreneurs, right? Creating the next great company, understanding the needs of a market, recruiting people, right? What do we want to spend our time doing? And I think we want to spend our time doing stuff that can be done automatically, right, through AI. Mean, I think that's a far better life than, you know, dividing large numbers, right?
Yeah. Um, have you seen many other cool AI projects up and coming? I know you talked about ChatGPT,
There's so
but
many.
is there any
Like
like,
Stable
yeah?
Diffusion, right? I mean, just generative art. I mean, there'll be a time when you cannot submit, like, you will not be able to tell, like, someone's, like, YouTube video. In fact, maybe even right now, you can't tell. Like, did that really happen? Or is that a deep fake, right? I mean, it's not going to be admissible in court. Like, no recordings are going to be admissible in court because it's going to be too easy to fake, right? So now you could type in a prompt and it will generate a video or a picture, right? That looks pretty freaking real, right? So
Hmm.
that's the future. So there's so much. I mean, it's we are with the computation that we have through GPUs, through just the better transformer models that we have, we are going through this whole generative AI is just amazing now, right? I mean, you're gonna have products that are gonna be generated through AI, right? You're gonna have content. It's going to we're never gonna be more entertained, okay? We're never gonna be happier. We're never gonna have the plethora of products that we're gonna get now through this whole AI revolution. We're gonna have so much available that it's gonna be like for the average human, it's gonna be a pretty good life, right? Versus before, where there's only a few good like. Hey, just look at. I'm sure. Well, you guys in Australia also have Netflix, right, or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah, correct.
But like the amount of the content that people are coming out with is better and better and better. And what we're going to see with all this generative AI is that content is just going to explode, right? I mean, with like Blender and all this kind of 3D graphics rendering, the CGI, that's just like 1.0. We're not going to be generative AI is like 2.0. You're going to get, you know, you soon in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, right, of your own time, you can be able to generate a movie that was good as Star Wars, right? It's going to have all this like special effects as Star Wars. That's going to happen one day, soon, right? Like soon, I mean, I'm saying within the next 5 years, right? And so you're going to be able to create content that once upon a time took, you know, Lucas Art, $100 million to create, right? And you're going to be able to create it like just typing a few things. That's going to happen.
Yeah. So how easy is it to create a AI for like just somebody fresh out of high school or studying at uni?
Yeah.
Is it easy to go alone? Is all you need just quality data and enough of a big enough data size,
Well,
or
it's
yeah,
getting
how
easier.
easy is it?
It's getting easier and easier every day, and so like, I mean, like this generative stuff now, you just go to like Playground AI and type some stuff, and there you go, right? And so, um, a lot of this stuff is open source. Of course, some of the best ones like GPT-3 or ChatGPT are not open source. You can't really build on top of it, or there's not APIs yet for some of the stuff. But you know, because people know it's possible, right? I mean, there's a company called Claude that spun out from OpenAI, the guys who created ChatGPT, right? So they got like I don't know $700 million worth of funding, right? So there's going to be a lot of competition because this like AI is what people always dreamed about. They dreamed about like Star Trek, right, in the 50s and 60s. This is what people dreamed about what computers are, and we are finally here, right? 70 years later, we are here, right? It is here now, right? The Star Trek bridge is here, right? And and that's that is I was listening to another podcast and they're talking about how like maybe this could replace public defenders, right? Because public defenders they have like 1,000 clients and they spend maybe 5 minutes per client, and how much of quality defense do they get, right? Versus now maybe now someone that's in court, a defendant, can now have access to ChatGPT, so they can ask ChatGPT, "What should I say to the judge?" Right? So, so I think it gives access to services that maybe were once just reserved for the very rich, right, the very privileged, and then suddenly now it's more democratized, right? And life is fair. So I think in the end, it's all going to be really good for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited for the integration with crypto and AI specifically,
Yeah,
because we have a lot of bad actors recently um, with SBF,
yeah,
the whole FTX situation, and I'm excited to see how AI can regulate protocols in a decentralized way to ensure that the team or anybody else can't intervene and do anything negative towards
yeah.
the protocol. Um, yeah, have you seen any other use cases with AI in crypto?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean, I'm working on a project right now where, okay, so let me just kind of address some of the things you said. So first of all, like SBF, FTX, like SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried is like I'm in Palo Alto, and I'm like 2 blocks from Stanford where he is, right? So this guy's chilling out. He pulled off one of the biggest frauds in history, right? And yeah, so you know, unfortunately, a lot of the crypto, a lot of the fraud that's been happening in crypto is decentralized stuff, right? And so I think this is the argument for going decentralized, right? I think what I would love about crypto is that it aligns incentives. I think it's and right now I think crypto's getting a really bad rap because of all these frauds, and there's a lot of frauds. But I think at its core, it's kind of a really cool idea, which is, um, you know, so like for instance, here in our country, we have the fiat currency, and we have a secret service, and we have police, and we have people with guns, and we have court systems that make the currency system work, right? So it's through mandate, right? Through the force of the law, force of people having guns and jails and stuff like that make the thing work. But what I love about crypto is you don't have any of that, right? There's no gun, there's no threat of prison, there's no there's none of that stuff, right? And it works because it uses everyone's self-interest, right? Like if you look at Bitcoin or Ethereum and the miners and how it's all set up, it's I still think, although I know right now people look at crypto and think, oh my god, it's terrible, right? All this fraud, and everyone's exiting and all this kind of stuff. But fundamentally, it's probably, I think and I'll probably be wrong about this, but at least at this point in time, I think one day people will look back at crypto as being one of the greatest inventions of humanity. Because if you think about what money is, right? Money, it's kind of like it allows humans to be like the hive mind. Like if you look at like bees, how do they all coordinate? How do they build this complex nest? Or ants, how do they do that, right? And they all have like bees. They use like bees actually they dance, right? They have a certain dance, and that's how they communicate. Or like ants, they use scents and stuff like that. Well, what do humans use, right? How do 8 billion of us coordinate to build a rocket that goes into space and lands again, right? How do we do that, right? How do we do these amazing things? And it's basically through money, right? That's bees use dancing, ants use scents, but we use money, okay? And it's but money in the past has been this thing where you have to use a guy with a gun, whoever has the biggest sticks, that kind of makes the money, or you use gold, right? But you have to have the system set up where it's like, gold would have been pretty good, but the problem is that it's has atoms, right? And so it's hard to transmit, and it's heavy, and all this kind of stuff. And so we have this fiat system, which is electronic, but it's really, without the Secret Service, without like anti-counterfeiters, without the FBI, without all these like law enforcement to actually make the currency system work, it would fall apart pretty quickly, right? People would print up money like crazy, and there'd be a lot of issues. So we have this humongous apparatus, right? The banking system, all this incredible amount of regulation to make the currency system work. And if you think about it, if you look at like how much does a financial system, all this enforcement take of the U.S. economy, it's like 20%. It's a humongous chunk, right? It's a humongous chunk of our economy. So it's like a tax, right? What if that 20% went away? I mean, that means you keep 20% more, right? So instead of this being, it's kind of like long division. So instead of spending your 20% to do long division, suddenly now, or in this case, 20% to make this whole currency system work, what if it was all in software, right? So it didn't work because I said so, because I have a gun, or because of a court system, or because I threat to imprison you. But what if it was because of your own self-interest, right? And I think that's the beauty of crypto, right? Is it doesn't rely on anyone's gun, anyone's force of law, or any coercion whatsoever. It's all because of your own self-interest. And so instead of having to tax the whole economy by 20%, suddenly everyone can keep the creators, right? The people that doing things, right? Like, what is like these large banks, like what is Goldman Sachs really doing? Okay, they're opening up a spreadsheet and moving numbers back and forth. Like, just that's literally what they're doing. If you think about it, right? They're not creating something. They're not creating Mosaic finance, right? They're not making the next great AI. They are just literally moving numbers on a spreadsheet, and for that they get a 20. The whole financial system gets a 20% tax on the whole system for doing not much of anything, to be honest, right? They're keeping themselves busy, but not really doing a whole lot. So I think that's the beauty, and that's the thing that I love about crypto, is that it's a chance to make the economy way more efficient. For us 8 billion people to coordinate without this heavy tax. And if everyone had 20% more, just think about, like, we would be able to do that much more, right? We could have 20% perhaps more time, or 20% bigger house, or maybe 20% more time to vacation, or whatever. I mean, it's significant, right? I mean, 20% is not nothing to sneeze at, right? So anyways, so that I talked about the whole centralized thing in crypto. So let me talk a little bit about some things I think are interesting. Is DeFi. So DeFi I think is really great. I think there haven't been the big blowups like there are. So there's crypto, and there's centralized like FTX and DCG and all this kind of stuff. And then there's the DeFi stuff, right? And so if you look at Uniswap, you look at all the DeFi protocols, right? The major DeFi protocols, they've all held up, right? Like, surprisingly, right? And it's all because it's software, because it's actually the purest form of crypto. You don't have to trust anyone, right? And that's like Mosaic Finance is trying to be totally decentralized. So even if one day you were out of the picture, it would still operate, right? It doesn't depend on any one person. It doesn't depend on SBF being an honest guy. It just works, right? Honesty is built into the protocol. So anyways, one thing I'm working on right now is how do you trust what someone has on the website to what the software is? Now, of course, you could go read, if you're a Solidity programmer, you could go read someone's Solidity contract, but that's a real pain in the ass, right? I mean, most people cannot do that. And even if you can, it takes a lot of time, right? How do you know what someone says, what they have on their white paper or the website is what the protocol says? So, anyways, that's one thing that I'm working on, just to kind of just because I think that's something that's important. How do you make sure the disclosure is fair, is true, right?
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about that? I'm not sure if you can or want to disclose that stuff yet.
Yeah, you could use AI,
Yeah.
right? So like, in ChatGPT, you could drop in a snippet of code and ask, what does this do? It will tell you what it does, right? So you could use this kind of AI technology to make sure that what's the human readable thing matches the actual underlying smart contracts, right?
And would you use like a zero knowledge proof or something like that?
Well, you could do that as well. I mean, so there's many approaches. So zero knowledge proofs are kind of cool because then with math you could do that. But the problem is it doesn't scale very well. It's actually very hard to apply that. I would like to do that, but it's really hard. Maybe eventually we'll get there. Maybe actually the AI will do the zero knowledge proof, but it's hard to do that right now. I think for some things, zero knowledge proofs work really well. Like, you want to anonymize your transactions. Okay, zero knowledge proofs kind of work well. Or you want to, connect your L1 to your L2. Okay, zero knowledge proofs work really well. But we have an open-ended problem like, is this contract fair? Is it honest? That's a little bit beyond the scope of a zero knowledge proof at this time.
You mentioned the government beforehand. Do you think that the government is going to try to intervene with crypto,
Well,
especially like with all the?
yeah.
They're going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They have already. I mean, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I ran for U.S. Congress is in our country we had something called the infrastructure bill. Okay, and this infrastructure bill is kind of a noble thing, which is like renew the infrastructure of our country, like build better bridges, better roads, all this kind of stuff, right? So it's kind of noble. But inside of it is this anti-crypto provision, which basically says that, you know, okay, so infrastructure bill is like a trillion, this massive, amount of money, right? That's this infrastructure bill, and so how do you pay for it? Well, they were looking at all the crypto people, thinking, oh, all these crypto people are tax cheats, right? And not to say that some aren't, but some of us do pay our taxes. But anyways, so what they wanted to do was they want to make sure all the crypto people rat on each other. So they have to issue what's called a 1099. 1099 basically says, I did this transaction with that person, this is how much money that happened, right? So basically, the infrastructure bill made you report on everyone. So let's say you sold an NFT. Well, you're going to have to issue 1099. Both sides have to issue 1099s. Or let's say you were mining Bitcoin, right? So you need to issue 1099s to everyone that you're processing that block for, right? So all the transactions in a block. You got to, the only problem with that is it's not, I understand why the government did it because they're trying to figure out by getting everyone to report on each other, right? If you don't report, let's say, you and I sold an NFT and I report and you didn't, then suddenly you're a tax cheat, right? Because you didn't report your side, right? So that's how the government is trying to make it happen, right? Where everyone literally has to report on each other all the time. And if you don't, right, you face 5 years of prison, right? You're a felon, right? So all this kind of big issues. You get a fine, all this kind of stuff. The only problem with DeFi is like, well, are you going to get someone's real name? Are you going to get their social security number? Are you going to get their date of birth? Are you going to get their address? I mean, good luck, right? I mean, so it's fundamentally flawed, right? Because it's like, even if I wanted to, I could not. Like if I trade something on Uniswap, how the hell am I going to know who the counterparty was of that transaction? If I'm mining something on Ethereum, how am I going to, for all the transactions in that block that I'm mining, how the heck, the proof is, how am I going to issue 1099s to all those people? I don't even know who they are. Everyone's pseudo-anonymous. So this infrastructure bill is a real killer. In fact, it just went into effect this month. So this month, you now have to start issuing 1099.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so it's a pretty killer, pretty killer. So there's this quashing effect of, and largely it's because a lot of people like the person in my district, she's 80 years old, right? So like they have not a real good idea, a good grasp about technology, about what's happening. So you have all these crazy laws that basically like even if you wanted to comply with the infrastructure bill, you could not. It would literally be impossible. I mean, like how would you don't even know the other party. I mean, you transacted them, but you could not issue a 1099. Yeah. And if you wanted to, you could not do it. Right? It's literally impossible.
How would it work internationally? Say for other countries that don't want to do that, and their users have no requirement to send that back to you guys because it doesn't really involve them.
Yeah. Well, Yeah, I mean, the law is fundamentally flawed, like technically flawed. Like even people here in the United States, you couldn't comply. I mean, on a centralized exchange, yeah, sure, right? Because everyone's
Yeah.
been, KYC'd and all this kind of stuff. Okay, centralized exchange. But with DeFi, how are you going to do that? Like, let's say you took, $10,000 of USDC and converted it to Bitcoin. Okay, who are you gonna how are you gonna issue 1099 to the person you bought the Bitcoin from? How are you gonna do that?
Hmm.
And you can't. It's literally impossible. I mean, you could do that if you were on maybe FTX, right, or you know, Coinbase or something like that, centralized exchange. But how are you gonna do that on a DeFi protocol? I mean, you
Yeah. Well,
cannot.
you can't really.
You cannot. Impossible.
Yeah, it sounds like they've set it up before even the infrastructure was there. So even record keeping can be pretty hard if you're doing, say, 100,000 transactions a year. Some for NFTs, some
Yeah.
on decentralized, some on centralized exchanges.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just swapping or giving tokens to like your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is not you're not selling it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I just don't see how they expect people to do this already.
It's pretty crazy bad. I mean that's why I ran. It's because I feel like I feel this was so ill guided, um, and I mean unfortunately a lot of the legislators, they're politicians. They don't have much of a computer science background. They don't really understand what's going on. So they have these crazy laws that make zero sense, right? And it's scary, right? Because, you know, how do we feed and clothe all the 8 billion people, right? If we don't leverage technology, do we just say that, the bottom half is just too bad, good luck, hope, I mean, the only way we can lift the rest of humanity out of the depth is through better technology. That's the only way. And
Hmm.
and 20, like I said, 20% tax is nothing to sneeze at, right? I mean, or here's another way to think about it. Like, what if all of humanity gets 20%, but that 20% went to people who right now maybe wouldn't live past five, right? Or I mean, think about all the people that could be helped, right? So there's a kind of a humanitarian thing about this as well, right? Of how by limiting technology or by having really bad policies, you are damning a bunch of people to a terrible life. Why do we want to
Hmm.
do that, right? It makes no sense. And so that's why I think it's so important to have a grasp of technology, not necessarily to fear it, but to make sure that it's used correctly. And if anything, you want to foster it, right? In fact, I actually think one thing we also want to foster, and this is the other thing that's happening, is like in our country, there's people that have been pushing to tax unrealized capital gains, right? So, so, so it's kind of crazy. So as a founder, right? Like I was a founder, my company was like a $45 million pre-money valuation. I had like 40% of that. Okay, so like 17, $18 million of tax I owe, capital gains tax I owe. I've had to pay, unrealized capital gains. And most startups don't make it, right? So you'd go personally bankrupt, right? So imagine that as a founder. Like it's such a anti-entrepreneur thing, I mean, and founders I actually believe are the lifeblood of a country, right? I mean, like if you look at the
Yeah.
United States or S&P 500, the index, most of it came from companies that never existed 50 years ago, 40 years ago. These are new companies, right? And that's something that our country does really well is we encourage entrepreneurship. And we have all the same number of failures as every other country, but we have entrepreneurs like crazy that kind of and what happens is because the old trees fall, it creates space, right? It creates a clearing for new trees to grow, right? And we want to encourage that because starting a company is one of the hardest things in life to do. I mean, most people can make way more money doing almost anything else other than starting a company, and the chance of failure is so high. So why do we want to throw more boulders in the road for people, right? Why do we want to have this crippling financial impact, right? It makes no sense, right? And so that's also kind of like why I kind of rail against this stuff is because I just feel it's so wrong, right? It's like entrepreneurs create something out of nothing, right? They start with nothing, right?
Hmm.
And they create, you know, in society trillions of dollars worth of wealth, right? I mean, almost everything you see we use today, whether it's this USB microphone I'm talking on or our computer or whatever, has been created by an entrepreneur in some way, shape, or form. And and we want to encourage more of that because that's how we go from living in caves to being able to talk across the world, you know, over the internet and do a podcast even though we're in different continents, right? That's how it happens, and so we got to encourage and allow this entrepreneurship. But sometimes there's this a lot of legislators have this kind of zero sum game that No, the only my main job is to take money from you and give it to you, and that's such a bad that's such a like the zero sum thinking of a lot of these politicians is such a bad thing because it just pits people against each other, and I think that's terrible. Really, we should be growing the pie, and the only way you grow the pie is through technology.
Have you always had these thoughts of being a politician? Like it was
No,
the second time you've ran for Congress. No,
no, no. So
what
actually,
what truly sparked? I know you.
it's only the first time. Actually, no. So
First time.
if you read my high school yearbook, it'd be like the kid most likely not to run for anything because I was very much a STEM kid, right? I've been programming since I was 6. I love programming, love technology. I was really into entrepreneurship, um, and so absolutely no. It was not in the plan, but what happened um, was the mayor of our city. He wanted to ban software development because he said it creates too many traffic and parking problems in our city. And but to me, software programming, coding, I mean, like my company did nothing but coding, right? I mean, we did nothing but software, and
Mhm.
I kind of felt that we want more startups, we want more people doing technology, more software, not less. And so I just thought that was so wrong, and so that's why I ran. So that's how I got into city council was because of this. Was because I just felt that um, Palo Alto is the birthplace of HP, which is kind of an iconic company. Facebook, Google. I mean, there's so many companies that came out of Palo Alto, and so why do we want to make it harder? Why would we want to get rid of technology? Why would we want not people not to do coding here, right? Why would we not want people to write Solidity contracts or to do write Python? Like, what's the big idea behind that, right? I mean, by
Yeah.
having this, we're all able to increase the standard of life for us.
I know a lot of people in your area would be very pro technology. When it comes to crypto, do you ever get people who are sort of dismissive of it
Oh,
or
all the time.
think because you
Yeah,
do, yeah?
yeah. Actually,
Do you think that
so
impacts,
well, I would say
yeah,
this,
do you
like,
think that impacts your campaign?
oh yeah, absolutely. So like, so actually, the people that vote are the older people, right? So the over 65 crowd vote a lot, and even though I'm kind of in an area that's kind of a lot of technology, the people that vote, like like working entrepreneur and working families, they tend to be busy, grinding it out, trying to create a company, right? They're not necessarily paying attention to politics, and so they tend not to vote. They tend not to get engaged or get involved, and so yeah, so no, definitely my pro business, pro entrepreneurship stance. Some people really don't like it. They, there are people who actively campaign against me because they um, they think that my stances are too radical, right? I'm a
Hmm.
as an entrepreneur, I know how freaking hard it is, right? I like so like for instance, in our city in Palo Alto, it's technically illegal to start a company out of your house. Okay. So, like what HP did, they had the HP garage where two guys in a garage started a company. Well, you're technically not allowed to do that, right? In fact, you're still not allowed to do that. And it's like, I mean, every entrepreneur starts at the kitchen table with nothing. No money, no brand, no team, nothing, right? And why do you want to make it illegal, right? And so, like, in fact, there's a network here called HBO. I'm not sure you ever heard of it, but they
No.
make a bunch of movies, a bunch of shows, and they had a show called Silicon Valley.
Oh.
And in this show, um, they had one episode where these guys are going to start. They're living in a house, right? And basically, their neighbor is going to blackmail them for running a company out of their house, which is technically legal. Which in most cities that's not true, right? But Palo Alto is one of the cities that's like that. And in the end, they blackmail each other because the neighbor was raising weasels, which is also illegal. You're not allowed to raise weasels in your house. But yeah, I mean it's kind of like inside baseball. So yeah, even though we're kind of in a tech center area, a lot of voters, while a lot of us are involved in technology, a lot of technology people are not involved in politics. It's actually a very rare. Like politicians tend to be a very separate track, and the people involved in politics tend not to be as tech savvy. And so yeah, so definitely I had a lot of people rail against me because I have these stands, which I don't think that's that radical, but maybe talking to other fellow entrepreneurs, they have no problems with it. But when you talk to non-entrepreneurs, they think, oh, all these entrepreneurs, all these high-tech entrepreneur bros, like they don't give back and this and that, and they're
Hmm.
greedy and this and that, customers traffic, So, but when I talk to my people, so to speak, of course they're like, oh yeah, it doesn't sound that radical. But when we talk to people who are outside this area, they're thinking like, what? Like you can start coming out of your house? Like what you're talking about, right?
Yeah,
So
why can't you start a company in your house? I
because
don't understand that at all.
because people are concerned about creating traffic and parking problems in their neighborhood, right? So imagine you rent a company at your house. Maybe you had people come over to work and do stuff, right? And now these days, of course, we're all over Zoom. But I actually tried
Mm.
to, uh, when I first got elected to council, that's one of the first things I tried to do. I tried to make it legal to start a company out of your house, right? To work out of your house, all this stuff, and I was outvoted, right? Basically, I think it was like 6-3 vote. So 6 people thought that no, you shouldn't do what HP did or what Google did or what Facebook did, right? 5 guys in the house, you shouldn't be able to do that, right? So so
Yeah.
so obviously the political climate is not necessarily pro entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I think the best way going forward is through education of crypto, because it's always the technology still it still works as good as it ever has.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, is there anything in America where they have been trying to educate people more?
Well, so I didn't actually get to talk about crypto much. So right now, crypto is getting a lot of bad press, right? And it's probably going to set the industry back because a bunch of regulators. I mean, if you look at all the regulation coming down the pike, because everyone's complaining to their congressperson about like, oh, I lost all this money on FTX. So, and a lot of legislators don't understand DeFi versus centralized. They don't get that nuance, right? I mean, you and I
Yeah.
totally get it, but like the average person, the average legislator has no clue, right? They have no idea, and they think FTX and Curve and and you know Three Arrow Capital and Uniswap. They can't tell. They all seem all they can think of
Mm.
is crypto, right? But they're radically
So
different.
what? Yeah. So yeah, what are the differences and the benefits of decentralized over centralized?
Well, the real big benefit is that you don't have to have SBF. You don't have to trust him. You don't have to trust that he's stealing customer funds and investing into a risky hedge fund. You don't have to trust that, right? By software contract, right? Even if let's say for instance like Mosaic, even if you wanted to steal the money, you could not steal the money, right? So that's
Hmm.
the beauty about smart contracts is all written in software, right? Software is law. You don't need to trust someone. You don't need to have an auditor. You don't need to have a a person with a gun. You don't need to have a court system, right? You don't need to have a secret service. You don't need to have all this kind of stuff that you need to do when it's not on chain, right? When it's on chain, it is like etched in stone, literally, right? Basically, you like it's really hard to cheat, or it's not impossible to cheat, and so that's the beauty, right, of it is that like so when I was little, I used to play Monopoly with my friend, and my friend he would used to like cheat. He used to like sneak, flip a couple of $100 or $500 bills and stuff, right? And so like, and that's the problem, right? When with centralized is that people can cheat, right? So you have to have regulators to keep people honest, right? And but with crypto, true DeFi, when it's all in software contracts, you don't have to trust anyone. I don't have to trust my friend. Is he going to, before we play Monopoly, is he going to like keep a few $500 bills underneath the board or not, right? Because it's like it's all like maybe we're using an iPad to play Monopoly, so it's all in software, so we don't have to trust like it's so embezzling money ahead of time, right? Right? You don't have to trust people, and so that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah, I love the fact that anybody can go and look on the blockchain and see if the treasury is all there, what they're using their funds for.
Yeah,
You can really deep dive into the analytics and determine is this protocol doing what they say.
yeah, exactly. I, th-
Yeah.
I think that's
Um.
that's that's it. That's why I think long term. I think we're going to go through this kind of what they call the trough, the Gardner hype cycle, where it's like you have this. It gets, people get super excited, and then it goes to this trough of disillusionment. Then you go onto this slope of enlightenment. So I think right now we're kind of headed down the slope of this trough of disillusionment. But I think fundamentally there's some. I personally believe that crypto is just a better form of money, right? I mean, it's I mean, with the fiat system, like, one reason why we have this crazy inflation in our country right now is because we print money like crazy, right? And so the
Mm-hmm.
central bank could, if you look at the amount of money being printed, right, it's like crazy amount of money, like just like, whoa, like it's just like more money's been printed like in the past 2 years or 3 years, than like over the past 50 or 100 years, right? It's just a crazy amount of money. And so you have this, devaluing, right? It's like this hidden tax, right? And maybe what we should do is have a stable currency and then just tax people, so it's fair, so people, it's transparent, it's clear, right? Because when you have this distortion in the economy, it's less efficient. I mean, it's like the Soviet Union, right? The United States beat the Soviet Union because centralized control is not nearly as efficient as decentralized economy. Our market economy is way more efficient, and so we're just outproduced basically bankrupt the Soviet Union, right? And and
Mm-hmm.
um, and so I think you know I think when countries start adopting this, right, and when they really truly start adopting crypto, we'll find that all that energy, and you got to think about all the energy that goes into. I'm talking about human energy, real energy, like kilowatt energy that goes into securing the money supply is just crazy, right? In terms of how much that goes into it, right? Versus if you could actually do it in software, right? I think it's way more efficient.
Do you think there will ever be a time when the government starts using this technology for the government as well, like through a DAO or stuff like that, or do you think that's too far fetched?
Well, I think like China is starting to do the central bank digital currency, right? CBDC. So I think they're starting to do that, but I think traditionally managing the money supply, managing the currency has always been the function of government because it had to be, right? Like how do you make sure that
Mm-hmm.
people aren't cheating and all this kind of stuff? So you had to have a government that did it. But with cryptocurrency, like let's say like one day we have a colony on Mars, right? And a bunch of people are living there. I bet you the currency they will use is going to be a cryptocurrency, right? It would not be,
It'll be
it
Doge.
would, yeah. So I think it might be Dogecoin, yeah. Who knows, right? But it would be a I think it's a better form of money, right? Way back when we used to use like seashells for currency, right, and all this other kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But I think there's some real inherent advantages, and I think if if the government didn't have to get involved in currency, I mean, they could still do a lot of other stuff like public safety and all this other kind of utilities. There's much other stuff the government should still do, but if we got out of that business, because I'm not sure about Australia, but I tell you in general, governments in general are not very efficient. They're very slow, right? You know, whatever the government does, it costs twice as much or three times as much as it does in the private sector, right? It's not nearly as efficient. And if the government could get out of the currency business, right, the currency management business, I think that would be huge, right? There's so much value that's unlocked, but I think it's hard because the government is managing the currency here for like 200 years, right, since the founding of the country. So it's hard to kind of get out of it. But perhaps with new countries, new I think that will happen. Or there's this idea like Balaji, right? He's a former, I think CTO of Coinbase. He talks about this idea of like a new nation states that are formed like that are formed through these like cryptocurrencies, right? So it's like borderless, right? So for instance, something that works for Google probably has more allegiance to Google than let's say India, even though they work in India, but they have more allegiance to the company they work for than the country that they live in, as an example, right? So Balaji talks about this idea of, I think it's called a nation state. I forgot the name of the book, but basically, the network state. The network, that's what he call it. It's a network state where basically people have more allegiance to maybe the you know the crypto system that they're on than the country they're living in, right? And so maybe that's how it happens, right? So maybe like you can think about like I know NFTs have kind of gone out of favor now, but maybe if you have the Bored Apes Yacht Club, you're like you get to go to these exclusive parties and you have more allegiance to you know the Bored Ape groups versus the fact that you're in Australia or the fact that you're in the United States, right?
Mm. Do you think NFTs are going to have a comeback as well? Because yeah, there has been a lot of bad rap with the whole Logan Paul crypto zoo
Yeah,
scenario.
yeah.
Um, yeah, do you think this is just a blip?
It's hard to say. I think I think there's gonna be a lot of experiments. and I think we're just starting right now, and I think a lot of them are going to fail. Some of them are going to make it, and some of them will be revolutionary. NFT, I don't know. I think the jury's still out on it. I do think that, like in this country we have the copyright. So currency is one of the things I think the government should get out of, because I think crypto is a better way of doing it. But the second thing I think we should get out of is copyright. So we have this thing called the Copyright Office, and and it's all centrally administered, right? And it's really clunky. Like you got to fill out pay for this application and do this and that, and pay all these fees. And transferring the copyright is not so straightforward, and it's really not clear who owns the copyright. And but what if the NFTs were the copyright, right? What if the copyright was all on chain? Because if you think about what the Copyright Office does, it is basically trying to establish who owns what, right? But it's all public, right? It's all go to the website, the Patent and Trademark Office. You can see who owns the copyright. But what if that was all on chain? What if the government also got out of you know the copyright, right? And so the NFTs were the copyright, and I think that would actually be pretty cool, right? So it's really clear who owns what, right? You don't have to worry about like, okay, you know, because like with the copyright you could sell it, but you don't necessarily have to tell the Copyright Office, right? So it's not really clear who owns it, right? It's like it's really kind of complex. And so with crypto directly that could be like that. Same thing with like property, right? So like everywhere, every part of the country we have the county office where you register like here are the boundaries of the property that you own, right? The deed of my property, right? But that's also like public record. Like all these things the government would do traditionally, where it's trying to make sure that there's rule of law and it's clear. All this stuff actually should be on chain one day, because it's really actually well suited for that technology. Like it's a public ledger, right? So that's literally what
Yeah.
if you think about what money is. Money is a public ledger. If you think about what the copyright is, it's a public ledger. If you think about like property, right, real estate, it's a public ledger, right? So we establish who owns what, right? So I think all that stuff should be on chain.
It would be a lot more efficient. It would be a lot more cheaper as well, secure as well. But what's some negatives? So could people essentially lose their NFT that is their essentially their proof of ownership to a house? What happens if they lose that? Do they lose the ownership of the house then? Like, what are some concerns you
Well,
see as
I
well?
think it's all on chain. So I think uh, I mean you're talking about like what if you lose your keys and stuff like that, right? And so I think we're kind of like in the point one version. Like okay, so crypto in general, the UX of it sucks. Okay, to be honest, it's like really complex. Unless you're an engineer or really techie, it's very hard to use, and like people forget their passwords all the time and this and that, and they lose their keys and all this. So I can't say we're there yet, but one day there will be better systems, better multi-sig wallets, better recovery of like forgot my password or I got my head hit so I can't remember my password. There'll be better, maybe the custody will be held by, you put that in your safe deposit box. There'll be more kind of like protocols in place to handle this kind of stuff, right? But I think in general, like all the kind of things that are really well suited for a public ledger, why not? Why not have that on chain, right? I mean, it makes it more efficient, cheaper, faster, right? There's just it's general goodness, right?
Yeah, I believe it's just a matter of time. There's definitely going to be mistakes along the way. There's definitely going to be more hacks as well.
Oh yeah, sure.
But
It's,
I
it's
think it
hard. It's,
is
it's hard it's hard to have
inevitable.
zero bug software, right? And that's probably it's going to take a while for us to get there because we have to keep on battle testing it, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you for joining. Is there
Sure.
any advice would give to anybody who wants to get into AI or crypto?
You know, I think crypto is kind of on a downswing. AI is definitely on an upswing right now. I think start by doing something, right? I think that's the most important. And I think also don't forget the political side because like AI and crypto both, and AI to a lesser extent, it gets kind of a bad rap. And so I think you got to keep your local legislator up informed and make sure that you let them know what you think is right and wrong because they set the rules of the game, right? At least right now, and want to make sure the rules are kind of set right so that technology is able to help people versus saying, "Oh no, we're gonna be Luddites. We're gonna put our head in the sand and you know pretend that you know not get the benefits of some of this technology. So I think that's also important. So get involved in some way, shape, or form.
Perfect. Thanks again, Greg, and have a good rest of the day.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.